On today's episode, we discuss planting seeds of chaos, restriction, breeding creativity, and making effective puzzles. This is the DM Shower Thoughts podcast. Welcome back. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DM Shower Thoughts, the show where we talk about our shower thoughts in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop scenarios in general, and especially how to become your best self through gaming. My name is Adamus.
I'm John.
And I'm Ian.
Howdy. All right, so we're going to kick things off with some shower thoughts. I have a set of players. They are knocking around in the Shadowfell. And this is their third campaign playing together. It's probably important to note that these players especially have kind of grown up with each other. They've grown up playing with each other in the various campaigns. So the first campaign, they were learning the game, and the second campaign, they started at a higher level, and they decided to try like the power gamer approach to things. And they started with Team Friendly Fire, then they started with Team I don't know what's going on, and now they're the DreadX Chronicles because they're basically FedEx in the Shadowfell.
Oh, that's kind of funny.
It's very funny. Their level of comedy and wit is also upgrading. They're big on puns, and they enjoy the humor of the craziness that ensues at a campaign table. But they are the young adult crew, no longer the teen crew. And we put themselves in the Shadowfell after a point where it's not just all sadness and terrible. Like there's a resurgence because of influences from the Feywild. So there's a stronger idea of heroes that can rise in the Shadowfell. But it's also a weird gray space for them to exist. They are allowed to play evil-ish characters and things on like the darker edges of things, just so they're allowed to make darker decisions if they choose to pursue that. Just like, for example, we'll get into that, but the trends that I'm seeing, and it's more a commentary on seeing them change from purely reactive players to more proactive players, and seeing that shift and seeing the little hints where that's beginning to show its face is really quite cool. The Shadowfell campaign, I told them up front, this is going to be a little grittier, this is going to be a little harder to do. You may not be presented with challenges that you can just punch in the face and be okay. And we've mentioned them before on the stream that they've been presented with challenges that are above their level, and they must be creative in how they navigate them, and they have been. They've been really cool and tactical and strategic about how they should approach these things, especially if they know up front, hey, this thing's pretty dangerous. You get the sense that, ooh, if I go toe to toe with this, I'm probably going to be in trouble. And that creates these cool puzzles and social dynamics that now they must navigate. And it's not just, I walk in and punch a guy in the face. They now need to think about those decisions. What are they doing? And that's been really cool to see them, because it's starting, I don't know if that's the reason, but it could be a factor of why we're beginning to shift more toward a proactive play style in this group dynamic. And I'm starting to now give them questions and homework between sessions. It says, where are you mentally? Where is the character? What are they thinking about doing? What are their plans? Where are their contacts? And then I can feed them more information between sessions. Whereas before, week to week, we'd show up. This is what happened last time. Okay, and we go. And we just fly through it. The trends we're seeing with this particular crew, they like to take an audience approach during certain moments. They like to put in their input for what's happening in the battle, what's happening from afar, and then see what happens. And that process of seeing what transpires and the insanity that can ensue is really enjoyable to them. But a player they were joking, but they pointed out, it's funny that the tree is getting more screen time than we are. And I looked at it and went, huh. And the tree that they are referencing, one of the players has a magical wand. He bought it for very cheap because they said, it's a magical wand. We don't know what it does. And it's a it's a D10 wand, and it has 10 things that it does. And you spends an action to use the wand. It's a wand from the Feywild, which is why it's weird, because Feywild. But you roll a D10, and each number has a certain thing that happens. Now we roll a 4, and you start to summon a Feywild tree that will ever expand until you dispel it. And it's cool, but it's also dangerous. You shouldn't like cast it and then walk up to it. It consumes the things around it. But they had done this one other time, and they did it during this heist mission, and it was just, they invite chaos, and maybe that's part of their play style. They invite chaos into their game just to see what's going to happen, and that experimentation is part of their reactive style. But I like that it's more of a, here, let me insert this bead of chaos and just see it play out. And that's always been a trend with this crew. They always just they go a little crazy, and they see what happens.
That just sounds really fun, to be honest, because especially since I play a Wild Magic Sorcerer as like my main guy for the most part. And it's kind of funny that you say that's a part of their reactive playstyle, because if you look at it from another angle, you could also see it as like proactive. You just don't know what's going to happen. So like you roll on the table, and you're proactively bringing in this chaotic stuff because it's going to be awesome, and you want to see the effects of your actions, which is like the whole thing about proactivity, is taking certain steps to further your goals or whatever you want to do. And I just like that idea that you can also just like flip the coin and be like, flipping the coin is proactive. Let's see what happens now.
Yeah.
So I just like that idea.
The other thing that I think is a really interesting note, and actually this is really cool that they were able to recognize that, because I have played in games where it does not get recognized, is understanding how much screen time everyone is getting. And for a lot of players, that for these players, and for a lot of other players I've gamed with, they have more the video game cutscene approach, where there are sections that are designated as gameplay time, and then sections designated as cutscene time, where everybody shut up, the DM is talking in much prettier graphics than my gameplay, which is actually, side note, something I really like about the Final Fantasy VII remake is it looks great all the time. I'm super impressed. Anyway, but to get back to it, then there are other players that they don't care about the cutscenes. And you have video games that are like that too, right? So like a cutscene might be happening, but that doesn't mean you lose control of your character. You still get to walk around. You actually get to see the cutscene from a lot of different angles if you want. So I'm not sure it's more of a proactive, reactive thing as much as it is just a preference in the amount of control you have over your character while things are playing out. And you can usually tell what kind of player is what, because if it's the cutscene kind of player, they won't talk, right? You might ask, what do you want to do? And they just say, I just keep watching, And then you'll have the other kind of player that's constantly like raising their hand trying to ask a question. And neither way is better or worse, but there can be a mismatch. And I've seen that too, where I've definitely been like, I want to do something about this right now. And the DM's like, sorry, I have to finish my cutscene, and then you can act. And it's like, but that's not what my character wouldn't wait around for the bad guy to finish his monologue before we get started. Mm-hmm. But then you have the opposite too, which is like sometimes players want to see how it plays out, like you said. So being able to recognize kind of where you're at with it, that's a huge value as a DM and as a player. Because there are also plenty of games I can think of where a player isn't being conscientious about everybody else having their screen time. And it's funny because those same players will do something like try to check in with the party. But it's like they have to initiate checking in with the party, which ironically steals screen time from the rest of the party members to do their own thing when they want to, So it's one of those interesting balancing acts when you're both a DM and a player of just keeping that screen time in mind, And
I like that they pointed that out, and then I when I checked back in with them, they said, actually, well, we're all getting our appropriate screen time, where we actually feel like we're getting plenty. It's just funny to note that when we make these decisions of chaos, if we can paraphrase that, that has these big consequences, as it can, and they seem to like to sit back and just marvel at that, where but they can know that I did that. I did that. We did that. And I think that's the value. Instead of me going and getting self-conscious about, oh, well, I'm doing too much, I should have them play more. They are playing because they did that. And now they get to see what happens based upon those choices. And those can have really cool effects, and they think they're cool effects, which I find to be really funny. There's an NPC that was a fluke, and there's a ton of moments in this campaign, in this group, where things are just they worked out because it was a fluke. So Shadowfell, there's this thing called the Cold Waste. The Cold Waste is a traversed space that seems to be ruled over by a dark deity, something that controls the waste, the water underneath, and we now understand what that is, at least a little bit. But it's a deity that takes souls. It takes zombies out. It needs an offering in order for you to cross the Cold Waste. So knowing that, there is, of course, in the Shadowfell, in Glaurung, where they stay, there is a factory where undead are normal. So you buy undead. You buy not domesticated, but you buy undead that you can, hoist around and pull places and use for whatever you need, because zombies are normal. And the kids love that. Like, yes, this is hilarious. So they bought a bunch of zombies and then dragged them to the Cold Waste, lost a few along the way from some hunters, who then they traded with to get a few more, and now have a strange connection, kind of a tenuous alliance. And then they got to the Cold Waste, and they offered just enough to cover the party, but they had leftovers. So they kept zombie number 6. And zombie number 6, all the while, they're very conscientious of the creatures they might be dragging along with them. So she's on a rope and they're like dragging her around, and she's a zombie. And they would say, oh, well, does zombie number 6 dodge that? Does zombie number do this? Did they do that? And I'd roll for them, and I kept rolling high numbers. I rolled more natural 20s for zombie number 6, witnessed by the kids, than any other NPC in that campaign. So she became this fan favorite of, we need to know, we need to protect zombie number 6. We need to make sure zombie number 6 survives. And the thing is, the undead that are not offered to the Cold Waste can still be affected by it when they traverse it. It just happens slower. But when at the end of the Cold Waste, they run into the zombies that have all been offered to it, and they are now feigned zombies. They are frozen fast, and they have bursts of cold that come off of them. They are very dangerous. So they ran into the hordes of those things at the end of the Cold Wastes, and had to navigate and dodge around that. But still, zombie number 6 is covered. She's muzzled. We don't know anything, only to find out later she's starting to heal over with cold, because the Cold Waste will still affect them. So she's starting to slowly change, and they're taking notice of this. If this isn't me saying, by the way, zombie number 6 is awesome now, it's these little subtle cues that they can say, oh, well, let's keep her alive. No, we're not going to sell her to this weird merchant. No, this zombie's ours. And they're taking ownership of this weird NPC that they're kind of dragging along. Now, zombie number 6 is kind of half feral and has grown and changed because of the Cold Waste. Now is a little bit stronger and has more like frozen bits all over her, and is speaking in short sentences like a wight. And this is the influence that the Cold Waste can have, and what they're starting to understand lore-wise of the various sections of the Shadowfell and how they can affect the undead and everything else that goes through. But it's a learning opportunity for them as they get more lore, but also they have sort of coveted this thing that was a random happenstance. I was like, oh yeah, your zombie's just gonna get crushed by this random thing. Oh, natural 20. Oh, your zombie's just gonna gonna just slam apart and undead fortitude. Your zombie's probably gonna she's alive. And it's been very funny to watch that progression with all of this. But yeah, it's cool. What's your question?
What you were saying about the factory and how there's like the undead are like manufactured there or something. It's kind of interesting because of how, or what I was listening to about what the Shadowfell is and what the Raven Queen does there, where like in some of the like canon lore of 5e, she like watches the stream of death like go by with all these souls going to their various places, and sometimes she just kind of like takes them, according to the canon lore. I don't know if that's how it works in IO, but it just got me thinking, like, what are the implications of having a factory for zombies, and what it, like, because zombies they're undead, but like, do they have like their souls or part of their souls, or what is that like? Because I know what a ghost is, right? I know what a specter is. How does that work?
So the factory in and of itself is a little bit cruel in that way, that it's actually reanimating the creature, and depending on you can have higher end zombies like wights that still retain their memories, but they're sort of undead enslaved to you in a way, but they're the smart zombies. But the act of taking the soul, they get the dead and then they kind of rebind the soul there. Sometimes they have their old memories, and sometimes they're vessels, and sometimes they're just reanimated and they're lifeless and soulless, and they will just die again. But it's a random roulette whenever they do this process, and this might be something that the young adults could go figure out and go look at. How do you do that? Because that's what it is. It's a roulette of a certain type of revivify type spell that rebinds a soul. It might be the soul that belonged to the body. It might not be. It might just be a fragmented piece of some sort of consciousness that is now utilized to bring forth the undead thing. And in a way, it's sort of spitting in the face of the Raven Queen, but the factory doesn't care because of the need for undead legions, because of the Evernight. And the Evernight is the capital of the Shadowfell. Their legions of Valkyries need armies. So the Valkyries are very powerful, but they are more singular entities that are really awesome. Together, they're dangerous, but they need armies. So there are needs for factories of undead, especially to combat the bone devils that live inside the crevasses of the Shadowfell.
I haven't read enough about the Shadowfell and all these different places in it, so it's really interesting to me to hear you talk about it, because it makes me want to be a part of the campaign and just go explore all of those things. And I just, it's interesting that you say that it's like an affront to the Raven Queen's like purpose, at least in your world, or what her goals are, whatever they are, when you create these undead. And it's just got my head spinning with all these thoughts of like, souls and memory and strong memory and other things like that. So thank you very much for explaining that a little bit more.
Okay.
Does this take place in the Fourth Age?
This one is the fourth, yes. Yep, this is the Fourth Age in the Shadowfell.
Put that down.
I believe, yeah. Yeah, we're not in fifth yet. And when it comes to memory, the theme of memory, we're seeing a lot more of that in Gray's Team Bug. And we're seeing it sort of represented. Memory is an important through line in the Shadowfell, not only tied to the Raven Queen, but also tied to the zombies. The zombies, as an aside plot thread, are, because they're fragmented souls being pulled back into these bodies. Most zombies are just, they don't move past the CR 1/4 thing. But if they're allowed to exist longer and they come in contact with other entities like the Cold Waste, they can start to change and be warped by those things and by those influences, which might also access old memory, whatever that memory is. Could they at one point become what they were before? Could they become a revenant? Could they become just a white? Are there different, versions of that? And the idea of a Fane zombie is a really fun custom monster made for the Shadowfell based on the influence of Kadath, the Cold Waste. And it's just been really cool to be able to, they're always very interested in the lore of the world. And I think that's why that audience approach also is there. They want to poke this here, put that there, see what happens, and then they learn and they write those things down, and they are so interested in seeing, if I put this there and I let go, what happens in the grander scheme of things, and how does that ball rolling smash into other things? And it's a fun little play style to see, because then I know other players that would not even care about that, or they want to be playing all the time, or they're not the people that want to touch that and then step back and see what happens. They want to be right there in the nitty gritty of it all. And then there's a spectrum between all of that. But it's been very cool to see them maintain that audience approach, and then also begin to shift toward, what are my goals? Where do I see myself going? And that's also driven a few of them to make some really stark decisions. So they were supposed to do a heist, which was taking two elementals, elemental fey creatures in like crystalline prisons that were taken from the Feywild to the Shadowfell by an explorer. And then that explorer, something happened to him, and now the gems, all 13 of them, are kind of scattered somewhere across the Shadowfell. And so you have some nobles in the shadows that are trying to collect them because they're more powerful together. And so we've got a guy, Dimitri, who has hired the group to then go do that. Hey, go steal these 2 gems from this noble, because he doesn't deserve to have them. He's just a little pissant, and I'm awesome, so you should go get this stuff for me, because I've already got one, and it's not nice to keep them apart. And so they're trying to figure out how to do this as a heist, and they figured out, okay, we can be guests at this party. So they themselves figured out a way to get 3 or 4 of the party into the gala, and then 2 to sneak in the back. So you had 2 different groups, and they were doing a really good job figuring out how to do this. One of them, however, snuck off, acted like a servant, and snuck off with the court mage, big half-orc mage guy, and had held on to a type of poison that he got in Glowrim in their starting city. I forgot about the poison completely. I love it when that happens. He poisoned an apple, gave it to the mage. The mage just obliterated, couldn't even think about his save. It was a natural 1, and he just locks up. And there's a very powerful poison. It makes you basically incapacitated. And then I was like, okay, he's gonna like fall over, and you're gonna like go hide him, or you're gonna do something. No. Okay, well, I would like to slit his throat. And it's just like, okay. And we did some rolls for it, and we figured out how to do it in a cinematic way. I also have guards on patrol in Roll20, so they're moving as he's doing this, and he heard footsteps down the hallway. But he killed the main mage for this noble guy that was going to be probably a major threat if they started a fight. So he eliminated that main threat, but also started the alarms. They started this great dynamic moment where they were all in the middle of the party, and then all the lights go out, and they went, oh, dark vision. And I could use Roll20 to say, okay, this lights up, and this lights up. But they loved it because it went from, oh, we can see the mansion, isn't this great, to all the lights going out. And then only seeing these little spots. I changed the music, and it became this cat and mouse. There are now sentries on patrol. He has like dark painted gnolls as guards that he just releases, like sending in the hounds. So they're smelling around with their spears and bows and trying to find these guys. Someone did rope trick and went, oh, and just climbed up. And it was just a really cool stealth mission. And then they sent 2 of their party members out that can go invisible in the darkness. And they did such a great job adapting to everyone's decisions, no matter how terrible they may have been, or how, like, what, not even terrible, just there are consequences to these actions, and then they followed along with them really well. And they adapted to them, and they understood, yep, things are probably going to go bad at some point. There it is. And then they adapted. And even when, I mean, this took a few sessions for us to resolve this. By the end, we've got a tree growing out of the display area, blowing up the wall, ripping apart, like falling out there. The main noble, who is a tabaxi lion, is now running around like breaking stuff because he's like, no, you can't take this, and he's raging. He has his mage buddy who's going, sir, could you not, sir? And there's a bunch of nobles getting thrown everywhere. There's grease everywhere, lit on fire. We've got a spider carrying elemental gems and then getting pounced on by a lion. The tree continues to grow and shoot through the ceiling. By now, alarm bells are being sounded to call the Valkyries of the Evernight to the nobles' houses. So they have Valkyries on the way, and they find a way to, using the fairies to help them teleport away. And they also found a prisoner in the basement, a drow painter who's a bard who paints. And it's just, it went haywire like so many heist missions would. But I love that every step of the way, they would twist things to have that little measure of chaos and then easily pivot to their decisions. And it's been really cool and impressive from a story perspective, and just also from seeing them grow as players. They are becoming less baseline reactive, but they're kind of the middle line between reactive and proactive. And they have always maintained that audience thing where they set something in motion and then see what happens. Set something in motion, see what happens. And it's been really cool because then the decisions they're making are really less chaos based. That when they insert chaos, it's a tactical decision of, I'm not sure what to do here. This could happen. I use the wand. I'm not sure what to do here. This could happen. I use this. And then other times they'll make really strong tactical decisions. Like, I can't go toe to toe with this guy. I step in the shadows, go invisible, and I go over here. And that's huge because it's way different from their first campaign. They have grown in a tremendous way while still maintaining that point of chaos. And I just thought that was a really cool, I'm gushing about them now, but it's a really cool thing to notice, to see their full evolution. They know the rules of the game now in really skilled ways, so they can make wonderful informed decisions, and they've been kind of restricting themselves on what choices they made with character creation, and that has opened up their creativity. And I told them up front, you won't be rich. You just won't be rich. You're going to need to make decisions about your resource management, and they have, and they've made it work extremely well.
I think that bleeds into we like this morning got a comment on one or two of our YouTube videos. So which really, it got me really thinking about an interesting progression. So the latest YouTube video we released was one where I was revisiting the relationship between rules as written and homebrew. And one of the things I really liked, if you read the latest Sage Advice anyway, and I'm pretty sure it's in all of them, is the philosophical discussion of rules as written, rules as intended, and rules as fun. So what is the function of rules in your storytelling and in your game experience, right? For some people, they're a lot more rules-minded, where they really enjoy solving the puzzle of the mechanics, which hopefully will segue into Ian's topic. And for other players, it's more about describing the story in a really intricate way. And then for other players, it's the unique alchemy of both. And it's just, there's a lot of value in observing that relationship. But the comment was from this individual, said that when he has new players, there's a progression where you start with a rules as written approach so that you can build trust, which I think is that's exactly what we've been saying all along, you know? So basically you're doing rules as written, not because it's a better system, but because you're presenting yourself as an unbiased arbitrator of what's happening in the story, you know, because there's nothing worse than a dungeon master demonstrating bias, where they let one player get away with something, but they're super strict about another player trying it. So, and when you have a rules is written approach and it's like, no, we're going to play to the letter of the rules with this spell, it positions you as an unbiased judge that then you can build to more of a rules as intended approach as your players learn to trust you. And that's a huge thing, right? So, and that's really what it's all about. And then once you've established that trust sufficiently, which is going to be different for each and every table, that's when you can start bringing in homebrew elements to really shift from a rules approach to a storytelling approach. And it's really cool to listen to because that's the same progression that these young adults, I'm guessing, have gone through based on what you've been saying for the past few years. Whereas they needed that structure in the beginning in order to understand the tools that they could use. But then as they got more confident with their knowledge, then they could start experimenting with things that could be a little different and break those initial things. You know, it's kind of like sometimes you use a pan to fry. Sometimes you lay down a paper towel over your chicken and you use your pan as the meat tenderizer, you know? So it's like sometimes you need to use the tool in an unconventional way to get to an even better outcome. A really good example from a story would be like Harry Potter 6, where the movie version anyway is the one that comes to my mind. But it's, you know, all the kids are trying to cut the bean or whatever. And, you know, he has the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. And he's like, no, you have to crush it with the knife instead of cut it with the knife. And, you know, you're using a tool in an unconventional way, but getting a better result because of it. So I just thought that was kind of it's an interesting thing to note that progression, not only from the proactive reactive, but from growing almost out of a rules as written to free yourself up for the more homebrew immersive experience.
Yeah, I really like that idea, especially for me as a new DM. I've been a new DM for veteran players, and I've been a new DM for new players, and I've noticed that even when like I'm just considering becoming a proficient DM, that I do have to start with the rules as written in order to continue with the more fancy creative stuff later on for homebrew. So I really do agree with that it sets a strong foundation, and with that foundation you can apply it in so many different ways later on as you progress in skill level, kind of like the martial arts. When you start with karate, in our martial arts anyway, you start with karate, then you go to Kempo, but then you bring back some karate, and then it's like it's really cool just to see how that can really apply to so many different things.
I find it very intriguing as you become more skilled in anything. There's a different mindset that can come out. There's a completion mindset where I'm done. I have learned all the things I can learn. I am now finished, and there is no more. Or there is a depth mindset or a more dynamic mindset where I have learned all these things. I have become more skilled, and there is always another layer. There's always a stronger level of depth. There's always more that I can get into this. Maybe that more is much smaller and much more nuanced, but there can be more, and that depth still exists. And I think that's maybe an important thing to recognize when you're DMing. I've been doing this a long time. That doesn't mean that I'm perfect and infallible. I'm always going to find another layer. And this is why, I feel like I need to work on my visual medium and giving my visuals to the players. So I'm making professional maps of my Shadowfile, my Feywild, Io, and all of its different ages, so that at the start of every campaign, here's the map. And what a great thing that is. And I would always describe it, and yay, we felt immersed anyway, but this could add another layer to that immersion that also is a point of clarity. And that's a point where I can improve. And as players, if the more you play the game should open up more. It should not become less. It isn't, okay, I did my barbarian class, and now I'm done with barbarian. Or I did my one wizard class, and now I understand everything there is to know about playing a wizard. There could always be more. I mean, John's played many versions of Solomon, and every time there's a depth to it. I know that there was a point where I think you, John, had experimented with the similar character build each time and changed things to try to find the best version of him, or the most freeing way to play him.
There's going to be actually a video once we're done with the evaluation of the 13 classes where I go over some of the favorite builds I've done and I've seen done by players. Yeah. So mechanically, Solomon and Molotov are two builds that they're really, really good from a mechanics perspective. But yeah, so from my experience, I found that skill is defined as your willingness to accept that there will always be more that you don't know than you know. So you're not skilled because you've almost completed it, or you're learning a lot less. Like, skill is the recognition that, I can never cap out, which is actually freeing too, because, and it's also, to me, it's comforting because everybody is human. Like, my most comforting memory of my teacher, my martial arts teacher, was I had to go to his house for a meeting, and he came out of his like home gym, and he just looked at me and he's like, "That sucked." And it was like, he was sweaty and he did more exercising in that 20 minutes than I'll do in my whole life. But like, it was that human element, and that to me was like, oh, you're human too, So in that to me is like anything, it's a little bit like a roller coaster, or there's fluctuation or an oscillation, whatever you want to call it. So it might be that you're in a position where everything's going well, which also means that there's not a lot of feedback happening, or the changes you need to make, like you said, Adam, are going to be a little more nuanced, or you're going to try little things that make big differences. And then sometimes, there'll be a sudden pattern interrupt that reveals a huge blind spot that you can then address. So it might be that, you start working with players that have certain like personal backgrounds where, there are topics that you need to be a little more ginger with. You can't game in person, so you have to suddenly learn online gaming, So sometimes, you'll have your usual rhythm and you'll be like, oh, well, maybe there's little ways I can, and then some circumstance changes and suddenly you have a huge blind spot that you need to now adjust to. And it's kind of like the stone cutter, right? So in stone cutting or sculpting, there's a lot of little things, and you might not even see the change you're making. And then that's when you have a breakthrough. It's like, it's the same as you've always done it, but you've just done it enough time in enough way that suddenly there's this huge flood of new information or growth. And also that growth can be painful. That's why it's growing pains, not growing joys, right? So, and adversity is the greatest feedback you can get. Adversity is the home. So it's when a player is like, I didn't have fun that game, that you're going to be like, well, time for me to learn a new skill set, So, and it might suck a little, like it's not a fun thing, and it can be the gateway to an even better fun thing, So I don't know.
It's like you say, it's growing pains, but like a big part of that is also in the growth mindset, persevering to the point where that it's going to be rewarding in the end.
Yeah.
Like, you might not be able to see the end or something like that. It's different for different, subject matter, but eventually there's going to be a breakthrough. And as long as you keep faith that you're going to have that breakthrough eventually, then there's no reason to give up.
Yeah. So, ironically, it's an almost scientific way of looking at faith, which is just a very interesting thing that, like, faith does play a huge part in that process. And that's also a loaded term for a lot of people, but just understanding, it's been very fascinating, like trying to keep a metacognitive approach and like paying attention to my own relationship with faith as a term and faith as like a philosophy and stuff. And just, it's been wild ride for the past few years, especially like the past 2 or 3.
No, cool. I believe you there. I mean, especially in my situation as like a student, for those who don't know, I'm interested in like Norse mythology and stuff and like heathenry. So it's like, it was really super interesting to me in the beginning, and it still is. I just haven't had a lot of time to actually devote to it, but I still like keep it, you know? So it's one of those things. It's just life. It really is.
I
But
mean, after all, that's just life.
yeah, exactly. C'est la vie. But speaking of perseverance and adversity, excuse me. I was thinking about my shower thought a little bit, and what you can do to make a satisfying puzzle for your DMing, and your campaigns and stuff. So, and I feel like it's a loaded term, because satisfying puzzle, what does that mean? Does it mean it's a hard puzzle, or does it mean that once you finally, get it, that it's like, that you just get that wave of relief washing over you? Like, I finally understand. It finally makes sense. And I feel that my action steps are rewarded. How do you present a good puzzle to the players so that it's not impossible to solve, but it feels challenging? That's what I'm looking for, as more like a skill as a DM to learn today.
Yeah. So my first point was the logical through line, that when you find the conclusion, you can then count back and see how it can, now having more information, or with the conclusion in hand, how it would get there. This is also the Sierra problem for all the King's Quest games, and some of the Space Quest games. You have a lot of puzzles in those point-and-click adventures where you have to take certain items and then put them in play in certain ways to solve different puzzles and different problems. And there's always one or two, at least, in each of the games that you're like, what? Where you have like a block of cheese, and the block of cheese is the thing that stops the great wizard from doing the thing. And you go, I held on to that cheese from the beginning of the game, and there's no logical reason why it would affect this outcome in this way, and yet it works. That's more of a joke by the creators, but it's always like, what? And puzzles like that, I don't think would really exist in a D&D game, unless that's the type of setting that you're sort of making fun of and you've all agreed to. But I think it needs to have a logical through line. Once you have the conclusion, that it makes sense going backwards. So when you when you construct a puzzle, you start with the solution in mind, and then go backwards and try to muddy the waters without being overtly obtuse or really, really confusing. Because it's okay to have distractors in a puzzle, but when you find the solution, it needs to be clear, even if it wasn't obvious.
Yeah. I just looked up the definition of a puzzle because, we just talked about combat is really one of the ultimate puzzles in the Dungeons and Dragons experience. It's the most structured pillar of play. There are very finite rules on what you can do in combat, as opposed to exploration or social interaction. The definition of a puzzle that I found in terms of what we're talking about is a game, toy, or problem designed to test ingenuity or knowledge. And knowledge is the key part of that, where I find that the most rewarding puzzles of D&D are the ones that where the knowledge is up front, and that you have to figure it out, but there's nothing like super hidden, because those are all the puzzles that I've been frustrated with. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. The World Engine puzzle was one that I was like, ow, and I felt like I didn't have. And when we finally had the solution, it was like, could we have done anything about it? So like it ended up being like the one of the spirits in Akra's like soul or whatever that she had collected was like an answer, but the NPC had to tell us it was an answer, and then the NPC solved it. So like it was one of those things where it was like
that was entirely my problem.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought was interesting was my friend Tim said this, where he hates puzzles in D&D like exploration, because puzzles are always a result of player ingenuity and knowledge, not character ingenuity and knowledge. So if you have a smart player and they're playing a barbarian with an intelligence score of 6, so they have a -2 to their intelligence, but they're like a player that has a lot of ingenuity, and another player who might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but they're role playing a very intelligent wizard or artificer, the barbarian may figure out the puzzle first, even though story-wise it makes sense for the intelligence-based character to do it. So, and this is where, to your credit, Adam, some of the stuff I've really liked with some of the puzzles we've solved recently is you're giving, and because we were playing on Roll20 and there's a whisper function, you whisper the more hidden information to the characters that tend to have a better intelligence or wisdom score, so that they start with the information, and then if they're stumped, they can then dispense that information freely and then work as part of a team in order to solve it. But there's also kind of a video game approach to it as well, where, you know, you present the clues, the players have no clue, so you either have an NPC or a loading screen like give like a hint to it, like, hey, by the way, if you turn the lever to the right, so like, or you notice that this indent on a wall has an outline, so like you give them hints of things to kind of solve it.
They've had moments where they do like an investigation check, and it's that general, I look at things, and in that investigation check, I'll say, oh, you notice that this is this handle on the wall, and there seems to be resistance to the left, and it seems to give a little to the right.
Yeah.
I turn it to the right, and then something happens.
The other difference is this is where I would love to use passive investigation and passive perception scores, because remember, if it's an investigation check, it has the possibility to fail, and then it really, what those usually resolve at is, I got a nat 1, somebody else try, you got a nat 20, and like you end up just rolling until you get it. So like, why not just give it to them right away, unless there's some kind of time thing. Like Tomb of Annihilation had a very unfair puzzle at the beginning, which was you have 6 seconds to figure out the puzzle, and I'm counting down from 6. So your player, if you want to try to solve it, can make an investigation check to see if they can score within those 6 seconds. Other than that, guess who's getting lit on fire, you know? So it's like a puzzle. Designing competent puzzles in D&D really is an art form. And the other hard part is if you create too many hidden punishments, it discourages the players from wanting to actually do it. Yeah. And it's a hard balance of getting it challenging enough that they feel satisfied having completed it, but not making it so easy that it's trivial, but not making it so hard that they get frustrated and they don't like it anymore, you know?
And there's this theory about when you're developing skills, this idea of flow, or the flow mindset, or the flow state, or whatever. And I mean, it seems pretty reasonable. It's kind of hard for me to like say that, you know, you could test it scientifically, because you can't really calculate this kind of thing. The idea is that you grow in skill when you face a challenge that is about 4% higher than what your skill level is, because it forces you to grow. And that is supposed to lead to an exponential growth curve or something like that, where if you just keep taking these like 4%, you know, bigger bites than you normally would, then you're going to exponentially go from 4% to 16% better from where you were to, I think, 64% or something like that. And it's just interesting, because I think you could kind of apply that to this, where you say you have a challenge and you know your players. You know what you want out of the puzzle. So how are you going to make it so that it feels like a challenge to them, but is not like overbearing where they just give up? So I think 4%, maybe, I don't like, if you can quantify that kind of thing, 4% more than what they have displayed maybe so far in ingenuity or something will allow for that kind of satisfaction out of the puzzle. And this is just really interesting to me because, like you said, you can just kind of keep on rolling if you want to do it that way, make like a skill challenge or something. But I do think that the passive investigation and insight will actually help me a lot when I'm designing these, because it will facilitate a more organic experience, I guess you could say. Instead of saying, make an investigation check, I would say, which one of you has the highest passive investigation or something, like in advance, not like when it's happening.
And that's something you can definitely collect at, especially at like a session 0, and at the beginning of every session, you just make it a habit so that when the players give it, it's an of course, not a, oh, he's asking for our passive investigation. There must be a puzzle,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would actually be, excuse me. I think that would actually be a really useful thing to do, actually, as a DM. Something I'd never considered before is it has to do with expectations of the game. So you're taking those expectations of what you've been doing so far as a DM and asking the players of that, and you're just manipulating it. Like, you knew this was all, it's the long con, which is like my favorite thing to do ever, is to realize something or set something up so far in advance that it feels like it happened like organically. It's like your plot hooks, Adam, where you have a plot hook or you have a seed, and it's just been ruminating for a while. They triggered something, so now eventually down the line something else is going to happen. And I just wanted to bring that kind of concept into a more concrete, like, in the moment puzzle sense.
So like in the beginning of Grails, I think in session 0, I had mentioned that like, I'm going to ask for I want you to display your passive perception, your passive insight, and I think right after saying that, it was because people lie.
Yeah.
And we now have established at session 0, people will lie in this campaign. They'll try to manipulate things. They will try to withhold information. So that passive insight will be very cool. And it might also then be a neat thing. If I know I'm going to have puzzles, sometime having an idea of what your passive investigation is can also help speed up that process. So I just know who are the characters that are going to be a little more investigative, just passively. And then I can be able to give them more information or guide them a little bit better. And then it doesn't have to be, oh, we're in a puzzle room because he asked for investigation checks. It's just a constant thing that's always going. So the players aren't then alerted into high puzzle solving mode. It's just when it happens because you already have that information. You're not triggering them for it. It can be just a common knowledge that you have. Same thing with a combat heavy campaign where it's just good to know what's your AC.
Yeah.
You always have that available at all times so that just, well, he hits you. Or wait, really? What was the number? This shield. Good. But then it's a intense thing, not a what's your AC again? Oh no, what happened? And then you have this longer wait of the momentum. It can kind of hiccup the flow.
Yeah. That ties like directly into the bullet point I was just gonna because I've been a player for puzzles, and as a DM I'm not one that introduces puzzles, because I'm guessing we're talking about like the more exploration puzzles, like we have to solve this tile puzzle to unlock the door kind of puzzle, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. Is that just like how you want to be considerate of the screen time of the players, how much time it takes to solve a puzzle. That can also be, because if you make a puzzle too complicated and it's the entire session, now your players may not walk away with a satisfying experience, right? Especially if it feels like the puzzle took longer than the resolution of it. The amount of satisfaction you get out of resolving the puzzle, if that's disproportionate to the amount of time you invested in it. So part of it is there are some factors that will make the puzzle like longer to solve. One of them being your descriptions and how many clues you give. And again, clues can be something that you kind of drip over time. But the other is the threat of a trap going off, especially how many times have we had it in a Grey Owls game, because we have very proactive, more safe players where it's like, is there a trap on the handle? Is there a trap on the hinge? And we spend half an hour trying to determine if we're going to get hurt doing it, and how easy would it be to resolve if you're like, your passive perception is a 31. There aren't any traps. Try some stuff.
Yeah.
Or, at what point is it that your players have been stumped long enough, you start dripping the answer to them, because that can be another thing too, where if your players aren't in it for a really heavy puzzle solving thing, a puzzle can be a great engaging thing if the players are in that mindset for it. If I just remember we did a Thursday session and there were riddles, and I hate riddles. I'm just not good at them. So for me, that was my grumpy moment where I'm like, I don't like riddles. But all the other players were having an excellent time with them. So why would I withdraw from their experience, if they're having a great time solving riddles?
That was a moment I think I had learned, as a quick aside, I learned from the Aqua puzzle. Because the Aqua puzzle, I had a pseudo way of how it could end, and there were too many possibilities, and they were all of them too obtuse at the moment, based on the character knowledge, based on the player knowledge, based on the lore of the world. We didn't know IO, and I think it was kind of wonky for me anyway. And I just didn't have the right end in mind to be able to create an easy way for you guys to get there. But then the riddles, I had a solution, and I worked backwards from there and tried to make it a weird literary thing that we could enjoy. And it was cool to see some players that would normally be on their phones or be kind of disengaged to be, what's the next line? And that was so cool to see. Like, oh, okay. Start with the end in mind, you doofus.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing is, it's kind of like Breath of the Wild, which is an excellent, if you want like A+ puzzle design, Zelda Breath of the Wild has it going on, because not only is there like a right way to solve the puzzles, if you watch any sort of YouTube videos on it, there are a million wrong ways to get to the right answer.
Yeah.
So like one of them is, if I can't finally manipulate this lever the right way, I'm just going to set a bomb at my feet and blow myself over the gate to get to the end. Like sometimes, sometimes you can kind of cheese it like that,
Yeah.
And that's what makes the Dungeons and Dragons itself beautiful, is that if your players aren't figuring out the wrong way and they're finding a way to cheese it and it's reasonable enough, why not let them try with a random check to cheese the puzzle?
Cheese the puzzle.
Yeah, that actually, and that ties in a little bit to like circumstantial rulings and stuff. Like the players might not look for the answer that you, or whatever, the solution that you prepared. But if it's just like cheesy enough, then you might as well let them do it.
Yeah.
Now, I've had the opposite experience because I didn't know what I was doing at first, but like making too many circumstantial rulings and like bogging it down a little bit, at least from my perspective. Apparently the players didn't notice, so that's good.
It is one of those things where
it's just like, oh well, I mean I did definitely, this is like so far off base that I'm just gonna have to, not super far, but you know what I mean. It's just kind of funny that I didn't expect this, but I'm gonna go along with it, and it'll be resolved anyway. So what's the harm? So I just I think that's kind of funny how that ties it back into that thing from like 4 episodes ago or something. But yeah, okay. So I'm just in my little notebook here. I'm writing down like some steps basically for like how you should go about designing a puzzle. So first one is start with the end in mind. What's the goal of the puzzle? What are you doing ultimately? Second one, I have blank because I'm like, should I say insert distractions, or should I say, something more crucial to the puzzle? I'm just curious about you guys.
Present knowledge.
Present knowledge. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a good one.
Knowledge that is required, because also you can present, there was a really good puzzle. It had to do with a wheel of different elements, and it was a Tiamat puzzle. So it started with a plaque that I think was on the floor. You guys haven't played this one, where the characters read basically a poem that talks about Tiamat, and talks about the legend of Tiamat and how the different heads have different personalities and that they bicker and they do these things and their values and whatnot. And then there's an elemental wheel that you have to basically engage each element and then turn the wheel and it opens a door. And all it took was they needed to read this and understand, oh, these are dragon heads. And then they sort of parceled out, okay, who has a fire spell, who has a cold spell, who has this, who has that. But in the poem, it's presented the different elements. So just by having the poem, they can discern the different elements. And wait, there are 5 heads, there are 5 spots on the floor, and there are 5 areas that we could put something, or we could shoot something, or we could pour something. And I gave those little hints, but they had the poem up front, so it didn't have to be, oh, there are 5 spots and they look like dragon heads. What does that mean? Make a religion check. I failed. Well, I guess we don't know. They were presented with a poem about Tiamat up front.
Yeah, I would avoid the distraction piece as best as you can. I do remember having read an essay that broke down the best Sherlock Holmes stories, and basically the ones that readers found most satisfying were ones where there were no distractions. All of the clues were presented and fit in some way. Some of them were more major than others, but and like the well, they'll get fixated on random stuff. Like you'll mention the masonry, and then it's like it'll be a whole side thing. And that's my favorite part too. Is I've been watching a lot of Monk, like Tony Shalhoub, and I loved Monk as a kid. Like I remember, what is it, 2003, 2004? So I must have been like 10 or 11, and I would watch the episodes as they came out. And first of all, that show, just does a gush. One of the things it did great is just because you have something that's diagnosed as a mental illness does not make it a weakness. It can be leveraged as a strength. And that's what made Monk such an awesome detective is I think they mentioned that he has OCD once. And like they actually named it once. Other than that, it's Mr. Monk, you know? Yeah. And that's what made him such an excellent detective is he could be like, the vacuuming on the pattern of the rug isn't right. And he would solve the mystery like that. But my wife and I, it would become a game of like, can we figure out what actually happened based on the first 2 minutes of the episode? Because the first 2 minutes gave you everything you needed to know in order to figure out what happened and why it happened. And basically, it was a game of how far into the episode did we need to get to figure out the final reveal or whatever. So
that's pretty cool.
Those to me are the best puzzles because you're presented with all of the information up front, but there's just enough missing that you can kind of fill in. And usually it's something like it's the solution is the thing you wouldn't think of. So I'm going to spoil the first episode here. In the pilot episode, the mayor dodges a bullet. One of his as the mayor ducks down when he goes to get sniped, his bodyguard gets shot instead. The solution to the puzzle was it had nothing to do with the mayor. It was disguised as an assassination attempt to actually kill the bodyguard because the bodyguard had discovered information that wasn't. So they had actually got their target, but they were led down the wrong rabbit hole because, you know, they made it look like something else. Yeah. So I guess the distraction does play a part of it, but you have to be really careful that the distraction isn't the thing they fixate on. They can see through the illusion of the distraction. Yeah. And there's an art form in presenting just enough information that the players feel like with their agency, they solved it, but not without your hand holding. Yeah. But not so many distractions that they have to sift through too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not overcomplicating it. That makes a lot of sense. So what I did is for the third thing then, I put avoid irrelevant distractions. So like a distraction, it might be misleading in a way, but it must have significance, you know? Yeah. So like with this, with the bodyguard case, they were treating it like an assassination and stuff, but by doing that, ultimately they still came to the conclusion that it was actually the bodyguard that was the target, right? So
Yeah.
now,
And the way they figured it out was the guy who ordered the hit on the bodyguard was stealing funds from the mayor's campaign, and they made it look like an assassination attempt so that they wouldn't discover he was basically embezzling money. So like it was still, the distraction was an integral part to the story of the puzzle, but it wasn't the solution to the puzzle. You know, there's like that extra little shift, and it doesn't have to be a complete subversion of expectations, but it's just a minor little shift that can create this whoa kind of effect, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
Distractor, you need to, I think, have a way to reveal the lie, like see through it, so that it is not so distracting that we figured out this one and figured out that's a lie. Now it's between these two. There needs to be some way to then reveal that one is correct and one isn't.
Okay. Yeah. No, I like that. That's really cool.
Triggers are.
And also, there's a large amount of forgiveness you need to give yourself, because I still haven't presented a lot of satisfying puzzles. I've done like maybe one or two and I can't even remember them. So like you're probably going to mess it up more than you get it right, at least at the start. But like everything, the more you practice it, like you said with flow, the better you'll get at it exponentially. You know what I mean?
I'd say if you have the idea to do a number of puzzles, that you actually start with no distractors. And see how well that goes, and see what distractors the players make up for themselves in the middle of it.
That's
it's very possible they're going to make their own distractors, just by getting fixated on random stuff.
Yeah.
And you'll get to learn what might be an appropriate place to have a distraction, what could have an appropriate place for multiple solutions that might have branching paths. That's also a thing that's kind of neat to consider, but that doesn't have to be every puzzle. And those are different flavors and tags you can put into things.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think this is really coming together because, especially yes, it's all coming together. I love that meme. But I think this is going to be really good because it's one aspect of D&D as a DM that I haven't really explored on my own. Like if the book or something has like a puzzle, then sure, like whatever, I'll just implement it, see how they do. But I'm just inspired right now to make a puzzle. And so I wanted to talk it over, not the puzzle specifically, but I wanted to talk the mechanics of the puzzle over before I actually, because I don't want to just like wing it and be like, this is what I think should happen. Yeah. And then when it doesn't happen, because it won't, then it's like, I don't know what to do. But if I keep these 3 steps in mind, I feel like it will work a lot better. So thank you guys.
and my favorite practice ground, I guess, for a lot of this is making combat like a puzzle, because combat has the obvious solution of let's just hit it till it dies. And sometimes that works better than others. But, when you can point to different things that the players can do outside of damage dealing, a lot of times that will get their like creative puzzle juices flowing. So like that sounded really weird. Yeah.
No, I get you.
It might be something like the proverbial chandelier is what you shoot and aim at to like drop it on a person, or there's something in the environment like the cold wastes could be an interesting one. Like if the environment is ice, treat it like the Pokemon Sapphire puzzle, where a player uses 5 feet of their movement, but they just keep going. And maybe they can use their reaction to make an athletics check to try to stop, Right. Like how would that change combat around,
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with combat for like minor puzzles and then build up to the exploration puzzles.
As an example, to tie it all back to me gushing about Shadowfell, the fight with the Fane zombies was particularly interesting because they kind of slid on the ice a little bit. It wasn't a full slide, but they had to kind of make a check to be like, okay, I can go, and then I stop. But the Fane zombies have these protruding claws, like their feet are overgrown, so they have almost footing. And they started to discover very quickly, the ranger came up and went, they're just zombies. He hit them, they burst with cold energy. And he went, this is a bad idea. And then he instead pivoted, and an ally noticed, wait, the ground is cracking underneath him. and they started breaking the ice beneath the zombies, and they get sucked down into the
Oh,
so instead of them again going toe to toe with these things that have demonstrated that they're fast and they're powerful,
that is super
it
cool.
went
actually.
boom and they hit the ground and started to do that. That also had an extra effect of causing cracks to form. So they also had to be careful where they were stepping, but it made it so the zombies who aren't paying attention to that would rush them and then hit the cracks and go down. So it's also preparing them for a few other times they might run into ice and different terrain moments. So if they have what is technically a superior fighting force, there might be a terrain thing. And they've been very keen to notice what is around them. They can hide behind. Can we get leverage? Can we get the high ground? Can we attack the ground instead of attacking the creature? And as they're a bit lower level, this is going to be very helpful in moving forward, just keeping that solid frame of expanding their expectations and their tactics. We can look at that with puzzles too. So every puzzle that you bring up, whether it be combat or outside of combat and exploration or social puzzles, you can start simple and then have them build success first. And then as you add other elements, the things you add can be small. And just adding small things, we know little things make a big difference.
I have a well in front of my house. Big difference.
Massive difference.
A well of difference.
Oh god.
That was bad.
It does go pretty deep.
No, and it's funny too because you mentioned it, Adamus, but having like the different pillars of play will have their own kind of puzzles that you solve. So a social interaction puzzle is very different than a combat puzzle. Yeah. So like, and the knowledge, social interaction I've always found is the player's skill of navigating information gathering, you know? Yeah. So it's not about using the information you have to the best of your knowledge. It's about trying to figure out how to speak to each NPC in a way that's still true to your character, but in a way that's gonna get you the information you want. It's like the information gathering phase. Yeah. And then exploration is about just kind of that's the more what we've really been talking about, which is in the environment or with the information we have, how do we solve it, which usually there is a solution. And then in combat, now it's a little more fluid and now it's more up to chance. So you're stacking the odds in your favor, but there's not like it's not that like combat, I would use a perception check. Exploration, I would use passive perception to determine how many clues they get to start with, you know? And that'll also encourage certain builds more than others. That's the other thing to kind of, right now, intelligence is not a highly sought after kind of secondary stat. Like, and we've talked about that. Jeremy Crawford has said that 5th edition is starved for intelligence-based characters, right? Right now, it's like DexCon Wisdom. A lot of people like Charisma, too, are like the heavy stats. But when you start introducing elements where, you know, maybe it's a strength-based puzzle. Maybe they need to physically move something, you know? Maybe inventory management and encumbrance is a puzzle in and of itself, navigating the environment, you know? Intelligence, how many, with your passive investigation, how many clues do you get to start with? If you present that at character creation and team composition, now all of a sudden you might have a much more colorful party. And because of that, you actually get better stories because you set up certain mechanics. So, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, like having players not all have dark vision. Like, how do you solve that kind of thing? Well, of course, you can carry your torch or whatever, but like everybody knows that if you're carrying a torch in like a dungeon and there's stuff up ahead that can see further than you, they're gonna see you. So it's like, it's interesting, especially with the Twilight Cleric, that you can just kind of give people dark vision.
Yeah, well, the other thing is dark vision is only shades of gray or one color. So what happens when you have a color-based puzzle where it's like match the green cube to the green square, like, you know, that whole kind of thing. Now that can add another interesting layer to it.
Oh, man. You guys are giving me so much to think about. I love it.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts. This podcast uploads every Friday on Podbean at noon, and then up on the YouTube, so you can see our wonderful faces a little bit after that. You can see wonderful John over at DM Shower Thoughts on the YouTubes, uploading on Sundays
At 9. Yeah.
at 9. Okay.
A.M.
Good. A.M. Not 9
Right,
p.m.
bright and early. Thing to start your day.
All right. Start your day with the DM Shower Thoughts. Excellent. And you can find me with the GM's Corner over at adamsdrakeproductions.com with blog posts every Tuesday and Saturday, as well as fiction, creative fiction from the Grey Owls universe every 2 weeks or so. And you might see some posts soon from our other counterparts, Mr. John and Ian, pretty soon. It's going to be wonderful. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And please, game responsibly. Bye-bye now.